Okay, who's ready for Chapter 4 of Prince Caspian? The Dwarf tells all about Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian lived in a great castle in the very center of Narnia. He lived there with his uncle, Miraz, the king of Narnia, and his aunt, who had red hair and was called Queen Prunaprismia. His father and mother were dead, and the person whom Caspian loved best was his nurse. And although, being a prince, he had wonderful toys which would do almost anything but talk, I suppose, he liked best the last hour of the day when the toys had all been put away back neatly in their cupboards, and his nurse would tell him stories. Now, he didn't care much for his uncle and aunt, but about twice a week his uncle would send for him, and they would walk up and down together for half an hour on the terrace at the south side of the castle. One day, while they were doing this, the king said to him, "Well, boy, we must teach you to ride and use a sword. You know that your aunt and I have no children, so it looks as if you might have to be king when I'm gone. How shall you like that, eh?"
"I don't know, uncle," said Caspian.
"Don't know, eh?" said Miraz. "Why, I should like to know what more anyone could wish for."
"Well, all the same, I do wish," said Caspian.
"Wish? What do you wish?" asked the king.
"Well, I wish I could have lived in the old days," said Caspian.
Now, he was only a very little boy at this time. Up till now, King Miraz had been talking in the tiresome way that some grown-ups have, which makes it quite clear that they are not really interested in what they're saying. But now he suddenly gave Caspian a very sharp look. "Eh? What's that? What old days do you mean?"
"Oh, don't you know, uncle," said Caspian, "when everything was quite different. When all the animals could talk, and there were nice people who lived in the streams and the trees, naiads and dryads they were called, and there were dwarfs, and those lovely little fawns in all the woods, they had feet like goats, and—"
"That's all nonsense for babies," said the king sternly. "It is only fit for babies, do you hear? You're getting too old for that sort of stuff. At your age, you ought to be thinking about battles and adventures, not fairy tales."
"Oh, but there were battles and adventures in those days," said Caspian. "Wonderful adventures. Once there was a white witch, and she made herself queen of the whole country. And she made it so that it was always winter. And then 2 boys and 2 girls came from somewhere, and they killed the witch. And they were made kings and queens of Narnia, and their names were Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy. And so they reigned for ever so long, and everyone had a lovely time when they were kings and queens, and it was all because of Aslan."
"Who is Aslan?" said Miraz.
And if Caspian had been a very little bit older, the tone of his uncle's voice would have warned him that it might be smart to just not say any more. But he just kept on talking. "Oh, don't you know," he said, "Aslan is the great lion who comes from over the sea."
"Who has been telling you all this nonsense?" said the king in a voice of thunder. Caspian was frightened at this, and he said nothing more. "Your Royal Highness," said King Miraz, letting go of Caspian's hand, which he had been holding till now, "I insist upon being answered. Look me in the face. Who has been telling you this pack of lies?"
"Well, it was my nurse," faltered Caspian, and he burst into tears.
"Stop that driveling noise," said his uncle, taking Caspian by the shoulders and giving him a shake. "Stop crying, and never let me catch you talking or thinking either about all these silly stories again. There never were those kings and queens. How could there be 2 kings at the same time? And there's no person such as Aslan. There are no such things as lions, and there never was a time when animals could talk. Do you hear?"
"Yes, uncle," sobbed Caspian.
"Then let's have no more of it," said the king. Then he called to one of the gentlemen in waiting who were standing at the far end of the terrace, and he said in a cold voice, conduct, that means take, His Royal Highness to his apartments at once, and send His Royal Highness's nurse to me at once." Well, the next day Caspian found what a terrible thing he had done, for nurse had been sent away without even being allowed to say goodbye to him. And he was told he was going to have a tutor. Well, Caspian missed his nurse very much, as you can well imagine, and he shed many tears about that because he was so miserable. He thought about the old stories of Narnia far more now than he did before. He dreamed about dwarves and dryads every night and tried very hard to make the dogs and cats in the castle talk to him, but the dogs only wagged their tails and the cats only purred. Caspian felt sure that he would hate the new tutor, but when the new tutor arrived about a week later, he turned out to be the sort of person it's almost impossible not to like. He was the smallest and also the fattest man Caspian had ever seen. He had a long, silvery, pointed beard, which came down to his waist, and his face, which was brown and covered with wrinkles, looked very wise, very ugly, and very kind. His voice was grave and serious, but his eyes were merry, so that until you got to know him really well, it was hard to know when he was actually joking or serious. His name was Dr. Cornelius. Of all his lessons with Dr. Cornelius, the one that Caspian liked best was history. Now, up till now, except for nurses' stories, he had known nothing about the history of Narnia, and he was very surprised to learn that the royal family were newcomers in the country. "It was your Highness's ancestor, Caspian I," said Dr. Cornelius, "who first conquered Narnia and made it his kingdom. It was he who brought all your nation into the country. You are not native Narnians at all. You are Telmarines. That is to say, you all came from the land of Telmar, far, far beyond the western mountains. That is why Caspian I is also called Caspian the Conqueror. Please, Doctor, asked Caspian one day, who lived in Narnia before we all came here out of Telmar. Well, no men, or very few, lived in Narnia before the Telmarines took it, said Dr. Cornelius. Well, then who did my great-great-grandsestors conquer? Whom, not who, said your Highness. Your Highness, said Dr. Cornelius. Perhaps it is time to turn from history to grammar. Oh, please not yet, said Caspian. I mean, wasn't there like a battle? Why is it called Caspian the Conqueror if there was nobody here to fight with him? Well, I said there were very few men in Narnia, said the doctor, looking at the little boy very strangely through his great spectacles. For a moment, Caspian was puzzled, and then suddenly his heart gave a leap. Do you mean, he gasped, that there were other things? Do you mean it was like in the stories? Were there... Hush, said Dr. Cornelius, laying his head very close to Caspian's. Not a word more. Don't you know your nurse was sent away for telling you about old Narnia? The king doesn't like it. If he found me telling you secrets, you'd be whipped and I'd have my head cut off. But why? Asked Caspian. It's high time we turned to grammar now, said Dr. Cornelius in a loud voice. Will your Royal Highness be pleased to open Pulverulentus Siccus at the 4th page of his grammatical garden, or the arbor of accidents pleasantly opened to tender wits? And after that, schooling was all about nouns and verbs until lunchtime, but I don't really think Caspian learned very much. He was much too excited. He felt sure that Dr. Cornelius would not have said so much unless he meant to tell him more sooner or later. And in this, he was not disappointed. A few days later, his tutor said, "Tonight, I'm going to give you a lesson in astronomy. At dead of night, 2 noble planets, Tarva and Alambel, will pass within 1 degree of each other. Such a conjunction has not occurred for 200 years, and your Highness will not live to see it again. It will be best if you go to bed a little earlier than usual. When the time of the conjunction draws near, I will come and I'll wake you." Well, this didn't seem to have anything to do with old Narnia, which was what Caspian really wanted to hear about, but getting up in the middle of the night is always interesting, and he was moderately pleased When he went to bed that night, he thought at first that he would not be able to sleep, but it didn't take him long, and he soon dropped off, and it seemed only a few minutes later that he felt someone gently shaking him. He sat up in bed, and he saw that the room, although dark, was full of moonlight. Dr. Cornelius, muffled in a hooded robe and holding a small lamp in his hand, stood beside the bedside. Caspian remembered at once what they were going to do. He jumped up and put on some clothes, and although it was a summer's night, he felt colder than he had expected, and he was quite glad when the doctor wrapped a robe around him like his own and gave him a pair of warm, soft buskins for his feet. A moment later, both of them muffled, that is, covered up and with a hood on so that they could hardly be seen in the dark corridors, and both of them had soft shoes so that they made almost no noise. Master and pupil left the room. Caspian followed the doctor through many passages and up several staircases, and at last, through a little door in a turret, they came out upon the leads. On one side of them were the battlements, on the other side a steep roof, and below them, all shadowy and shimmery, the castle gardens, and above them, stars, many stars, and the moon. Presently, they came to another door which led into the great central tower of the whole castle. Dr. Cornelius unlocked it, and they began to climb the dark, winding stairs up the tower. Caspian was becoming excited. He had never been allowed up this staircase before. It was a long and steep climb, but when they came out on the roof of the tower and Caspian had got his breath from being tired of climbing so high, he felt that it had been well worth it. Away off on his right, he could see, rather indistinctly, the western mountains. On his left was the gleam of the great river, and everything was so quiet. He could hear the sound of the waterfall at Beaver's Dam a mile away. That's how quiet it was up in the tower. There was no difficulty in picking out the 2 stars they had come out to see. They hung rather low in the southern sky, almost as bright as 2 little moons, and very close together. "Are they going to have a collision?" he asked in an awestruck voice. "Nay, dear prince," said the doctor, and he too spoke in a whisper. "The great lords of the upper sky know the steps of their dance too well. Look well upon them. Their meeting is fortunate and means some great good for the sad realm of Narnia. Tarva, the Lord of Victory, salutes Alambo, the Lady of Peace. They are just now coming to their nearest." "It's a pity that tree gets in the way," said Caspian. "We'd really see better from the west tower, though it's not so high." Dr. Cornelius said nothing for about 2 minutes. He just stood still with his eyes staring at the 2 stars. Then he drew a deep breath, and he turned to Caspian. "There," he said, "you have seen what no man now alive has seen, nor will ever see again. And you are right, we should have seen it even better from the smaller tower. But I brought you here for a different reason." Caspian looked up at him, but the doctor's hood concealed most of his face. "The good thing about this tower," said Dr. Cornelius, "is that right underneath us we have 6 empty rooms, and the long stairways we just climbed up, and the door at the bottom of the stairs I locked when we came up. Nobody can hear what we're saying from where we are here." "Are you going to tell me what you wouldn't tell me the other day?" asked Caspian. "I am," said the doctor, "but remember, you and I must never talk about these things except here on the great tower." No, that's a promise," said Caspian. I won't talk about it, but please go on." "Now listen," said the doctor. "All you have heard about old Narnia is true. It's not the land of men. It is the country of Aslan, the country of the waking trees and visible naiads, of fauns and satyrs and dwarves and giants, of the gods and the centaurs, of talking beasts. It was against these animals that the first Caspian fought. It is you the Telmarines who silenced the beasts and the trees and the fountains, and who killed and drove away all the dwarves and the fauns, and who are now trying to cover up even the memories of them. The king doesn't allow them to be spoken of even. Oh, I do wish we hadn't have done that, said Caspian, and I am glad it was all true, even if it's all over. Ah, many of your race wish that in secret, said Dr. Cornelius. But doctor, said Caspian, why do you say my race? After all, I suppose you're a Telmarine too. Am I? Said the doctor. Well, you're a man anyway, said Caspian. Am I? Said the doctor in a deeper voice. And at the same time he threw back his hood so that Caspian could see his face clearly in the moonlight. All at once, Caspian realized the truth and felt that he ought to have realized it long before. Dr. Cornelius was so small and so fat, and he had such a very long beard. Two thoughts came into his head at the same moment. One was a thought of terror. He's not a real man, not a man at all. He's a dwarf, and he's brought me up here to kill me. The other thought he had was sheer delight. There are real dwarves still, and I've seen one at last. So you've guessed it in the end, said Dr. Cornelius, or guessed it nearly right. I'm not a pure dwarf. I do have human blood in me as well. Many dwarves escaped in the great battles and lived on, shaving their beards and wearing high-heeled shoes and pretending to be men. They have mixed with your Telmarines. I am one of these, only a half-dwarf, mind you, and if any of my kindred, the true dwarves, are still alive anywhere in the world, doubtless, they would despise me and call me a traitor because I'm half-human. But never in all these years have we forgotten our own people and all the other happy creatures of Narnia and the long-lost days of freedom. I'm sorry, Doctor, said Caspian. It wasn't my fault, you know. Oh, I'm not saying these things in blame of you, dear Prince, answered the doctor. You may well ask why I say them at all, but I have two reasons. First, because my old heart has carried these secret memories so long that it aches with them and would burst if I did not whisper them to you. But secondly, for this reason, that when you become king, you may help us. For I know that you also, Telmarine though you are, love the old things. Oh, I do, said Caspian, but, well, how can I help? You can be kind to the poor remnants of the dwarf people like myself. You can gather learned magicians and try to find a way of awaking the trees once more. You can search through all the nooks and rooks and crannies and wild places of the land to see if any fauns or talking beasts or dwarfs are perhaps still in hiding. Well, do you think there are any? Asked Caspian eagerly. Well, I don't know. I don't know, said the doctor with a deep sigh. Sometimes I am afraid there can't be. I've been looking for traces of them all my life. Sometimes I have thought I heard a dwarf drum in the mountains. Sometimes at night in the woods I thought I had caught a glimpse of fauns and satyrs dancing a long way off, but when I came to the place where I thought they were, there was never anything there. I have often despaired, but something always happens to start me hoping again. I don't know. But at least you can try to be a king like the high King Peter of old, and not like your uncle. Well, then it's true about the kings and queens too, and about the White Witch, said Caspian. Oh, it certainly is true, said Cornelius. Their reign was the golden age in Narnia, and the land has never forgotten them. Well, did they live in this castle, Doctor? Nay, nay, my dear, said the old man. This castle is a thing of yesterday. Your great-great-grandfather built it. But when the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve were made kings and queens of Narnia by Aslan himself, they lived in the castle of Cair Paravel. No man alive has seen that blessed place, and perhaps even all the ruins of it have now vanished, but we believe it was far from here, down at the mouth of the great river on the very shore of the sea.
Ah, said Caspian with a shudder. Do you mean in the black woods where all the ghosts live? Your Highness speaks as you have been taught, said the doctor, but those are all lies. There are no ghosts there. There is a story invented by the Telmarines that tells about ghosts. Your kings are in deadly fear of the sea because they can never quite forget that in all stories, Aslan comes from over the sea. They don't want to go anywhere near it, and they don't want anyone else to go near it. So they have let the great woods grow up as thick as they can grow to cut their people off from the coast. But because they have quarreled with the trees, they are afraid of the woods. And because they are afraid of the woods, they imagine that they are full of ghosts. And the kings and the great men, hating both the sea and the woods, partly believe these stories and partly encourage them. They feel safer if no one in Narnia dares to go down to the coast and look out to sea towards Aslan's land and the morning and the eastern end of the world. There was a deep silence between them for a few minutes. Then Dr. Cornelius finally said, "Come, we have been here long enough. It is time to go down and to bed." "Oh, must we?" said Caspian. I'd like to go on talking about these things for hours and hours and hours. "Someone might begin looking for us if we did that," said Dr. Cornelius. And that is the end of chapter 4.